Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 30 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tax day is fast approaching. If you as a taxpayer get audited and the IRS subpoenas documents from you, do you think you could just destroy them and say the heck with it? Could you lie to the IRS when they're asking you about your taxes and investigating you? If somehow you unintentionally provided false information to the IRS, could you decline to correct the record once you found out that what you told them was not true? If you had a duty to comply with a lawfully issued subpoena, could you take basic efforts to comply? I think every taxpayer in America instinctively knows that they would never be able to get away with the conduct that I just outlined. And so I think the question that we here in this body have to answer is, should the IRS be able to get away with conduct that a taxpayer would never be able to get away with? Can we really accept that the IRS gets to live under a lower standard of conduct than the taxpayers that the agency wields so much power over? And we know how this began. The IRS abused its authority. They targeted Americans based on their First Amendment beliefs. They got caught red-handed, and so Congress investigated. Now, the Department of Justice was supposedly investigating, but that was baked in the cake from the beginning. They were not interested in this case, and of course, they didn't pursue prosecutions. Ultimately, even though Lois Lerner was held in contempt, they didn't pursue that even to the grand jury. So Congress has tried to get to the truth of this, and Congress is even taking some action like cutting funding for the IRS. Of course, when we cut funding, all they did was stop answering the phone calls. So they didn't take it out of the bureaucracy. They just basically harmed the taxpayers. So we are trying to get to the truth. We subpoena documents from the IRS. We bring in the Commissioner, John Koskinen, to testify. And we're trying to get the truth on behalf of the American people. And yet, what has happened? The IRS destroyed 400 backup tapes containing as many as 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails that were under not one but two congressional subpoenas. Commissioner Koskinen came to the Congress and made multiple statements that are demonstrably false. He breached his duty to correct the record once it was clear that some of his statements were false, such as the fact that he said, "We will produce every one of her emails." Koskinen claimed that the IRS went to, quote, great lengths to ensure that Congress was given all documents, yet the IRS failed to conduct even basic investigation, such that the Inspector General found 1,000 emails that were in the IRS's possession all along. It took them 2 weeks to find it. The IRS didn't look at Lerner's BlackBerry. They didn't look in other areas which were obvious that you would want to look at. Great lengths? Give me a break. As Judge David Sentel noted today in the D.C. Circuit, it's hard to find the IRS to be an agency that we can trust. So I think the question is what is the remedy for them frustrating the American people's inquiry into their targeting of Americans? I have argued, along with my colleagues here, that the appropriate remedy is found in the Constitution, which provides for impeachment of civil officers. You have an IRS commissioner who breached multiple duties that he owed to the public, and he violated the public trust, which is what Alexander Hamilton said was kind of the touchstone for what an impeachment should be in the Federalist Papers. Impeachment's not a prosecution or a punishment. It's really a constitutional check. And so I think as you listen to some of the conduct that the IRS engaged in, my colleagues will go into more of it. Obviously, there's a need to get the truth, but there's also a need for this institution here to stand up for itself. It's really a question of the House's self-respect. How much longer can we, as elected officials, allow the bureaucracy to simply walk all over the Congress? We're supposed to be the people's representatives. We're supposed to be able to do justice for them when the government is not acting appropriately. You know, fear of a media backlash or that people in the Beltway will say you shouldn't be doing it, that's no excuse for our failure to discharge our basic constitutional duties. Ambition, as James said, must be made to counteract ambition. No government agency is above oversight and accountability by the people's representatives. And so, as it stands now, we have filed articles of impeachment that have basically been collecting dust for several months. We think they should be brought up on the Judiciary Committee, and we should have a debate about whether this commissioner's conduct satisfied the standards of conduct that the Founding Fathers envisioned for civil officers in the United States. I think any taxpayer who looks at what the IRS did will instinctively say, you know, it just ain't right that they're able to get away with that when they're dealing with the Congress, but I would never be able to get away with that when I'm dealing with the IRS. And with that, I would love to recognize my friend and colleague from Ohio, a guy that's been really, really fearless on holding the IRS to account, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.